Hello everybody, and welcome to the Dark Souls 3 boss ranking video. God, I've waited so long to say that. As you guys may or may not have seen, 4 Lords of Cinder have been felled, the Soul of Cinder has been defeated, and the fire has been linked, which means it's time for me to shit on half the bosses and suck off the other. It's only taken me 3 years. All jokes aside, I'll be linking the full playlist of videos in the description so you guys can go and watch them all. Whilst there aren't as many videos as the Bloodborne series, I've enjoyed Dark Souls just as much, if not more, and feel my editing style has come on leaps and bounds since then, so it should hopefully be a good watch. This being my second From game, I do make quite a few comparisons to Bloodborne 2, so I will be linking that playlist down so you guys can get any context if need be. In terms of what's next, I'm yet to properly decide, although getting a PS5 and therefore Elden Ring, going through both that and the DLC seems like the extremely likely option, whilst on the other hand I am halfway through a refresher Bloodborne run with the intention of getting as far through as possible and then throwing myself into the Chalice dungeons, although looking through boss rankings and seeing 90% of all the Chalice dungeon bosses sitting near the bottom of most lists, I'll doubt that'll happen anytime soon. If you guys have any idea of any Souls-like you'd want me to try, Hollow Knight or Lies of P are examples I've wanted to play for a while, maybe finding my way into Archthrones, a community dubbed Dark Souls 4, then please let me know. Very similarly to the Bloodborne ranking, this list is going to be based on my own personal opinions, experiences and thoughts on the bosses, with some extra little additions on other aspects like boss location, build-up and theme, perhaps some lore research, as I realised after the Bloodborne run that the untold stories behind a lot of the characters and bosses make the world feel more whole and make the experience just infinitely better. That being said, I have tried to do as much of my own research as possible, but at the end of the day my knowledge isn't perfect, so if I do have a theory that is proven or disproven, or just get something wrong, please don't witch hunt me, I'm not f***ing Varty Vidya. I realised after the last time that there was some controversy around the fact that I should have factored in the boss difficulty as well, but if I had done that, then the list wouldn't have completely showed my true feelings about them. However, if this list receives similar responses, what I'll do is I'll make a Google form, I'll link it below, and tell you to shove it straight up your ass. If, like last ranking, you want an extra challenge, then take a drink every time I say boss or fight. Do it. Do it this time. Don't be a pussy. Man up. It's been over a year since the last ranking. Get on with it. Lastly, if there is any footage that isn't mine, I'll put the title on screen and link the rightful owner below. But otherwise, let's get onto the list as I count down my ranking of the 25 bosses in Dark Souls 3. The Ancient Wyvern tops off the list at number 25, not because I don't like it, not because I don't think it's cool, just because I don't even see it as a boss. It's universally known as a level hazard with a health bar. It's, at the end of the day, pointless. From my point of view, over the course of the Dark Souls series, dragons and wyverns had been hyped up as these beings of great power, with the Dark Souls 1 trailer describing them as everlasting, and only those that possessed great souls could do any damage at all. Gwyn with his sunlight, the Witch of Izalith with her great firestorms, Nito with his miasma of death and disease, and Seath betraying his own, the latter of which, alongside Calamite, Sin, Midir, curse you, Baal! Prove that these creatures were due to be something spectacular, and while for the most part they are, if we're talking specifically about the wyverns, then the one right at the start of the high wall shows they're formidable by killing everything in that portion of the bridge at once, although I did mistake it for a dragon at first.
No! That's not a dragon! It's clearly a wyvern! It only has 2 legs instead of 4! Don't you know anything about mythical creatures? Listen here, you bleeding geek! If it's a big flying lizard, it's a f***ing dragon!
The same goes for the ones in Lothric Castle. Even lesser powerful variants such as the Hellkite Drake in Dark Souls 1 can cause some real issues. So why on earth can the one found at Archdragon Peak, a place destined to have cool dragon/wyvern enemies, whose theme gives off vibes of this is a big fuck-off wyvern kid, good luck, have a boss that can be beaten by a quick jog and a slight drop? I did, in honesty, beat it on my second attempt, which apparently is considered embarrassing by most. However, if you look at where I picked the souls up from, this clearly wasn't due to the boss. It was due to the many serpent men that also clutter the area, again reinforcing the idea that this is just like all the others, just with a slight gimmick, similar to the giants in the cathedral or the gaping wolf on the Irithyll bridge. There are the obvious changes that can make this fight better, for example a Gravetender Greatwolf situation where the plunging attack is just a one-time thing and takes off a percentage of health, leaving the rest of the fight to be done normally, or even just get rid of the plunge entirely and reduce the health pool. At the end of the day though, when the full wyvern boss puts less fight than a foot, it's destined to be at the very bottom of the list. That destined that I've written this portion of the script right after beating the Nameless King, just because I know that there's nothing being into last place. Although there was one that was close. The number 24 spot goes to Halflight Spear of the Church. Can we move on now, because I really don't want to talk about this guy. This is, or should I say, should be the real start of the list, because he is at least a boss, although if you remember what I said about Mikolash, he's a hunter find, so surely he should be up higher on the list, based on the fact that my personal playstyle clutches to parries and visuals as much as Homelander clutches onto relevancy. Boys, Season 4 arseholes still relevant. This boss just threw my opinion of the PvP-esque boss fights right in the bin.
Know your f***ing place, trash!
I was tempted to get him a bit of leeway, not all the grief, due to the backstab merchants that also clutter the fight, but when they're both as bad as each other, yeah, just get in the bin with it.
Trash!
For context, I'm going to be ranking the offline version of this boss, mainly because I fought only him, but because this entry would be a million miles higher if I went in and smashed it first time, because I match-made with a quadriplegic woman called Jane with all the grace and decorum of a reversing dump truck without any wheels on. Now, in terms of why this fight is second last, I'll split it into two subcategories, the first being the Painting Guardians. These little f***ers annoy me to no end. Not only do they make the fight twice as long as it needs to be, but their backstab window is the most broken thing in the game. Their wombo combo moves make you wish the fight was in the rafters just so they'd kill themselves, and don't even get me started on their knife throwing bullshit. Worst of them all though is the healing. They will always, and I mean always, choose the perfect moment to inconvenience you. They'll stun lock you with knives, heal. They'll bait you into thinking they're going to go for a combo, heal. Or they'll bait you into thinking they'll heal, well they'll just burst you with knives and send you back to the lobby. One good thing about the Painting Guardians is that they're at least a little bit aggressive, meaning you can lure them behind the pillars to get some privacy. Which leads me on to the actual boss of the fight, Halflight. This menace is the most passive motherfucker I've ever had the mispleasure of fighting, and I can't blame him since it benefits him massively. If he has his bow out, then he'll just sit back and throw pot shots. If he wants to build some distance, he'll summon some electric spears out the ground and tracking darts around his head. And if he has his sword out, there's genuinely no better way I can describe the situation than you're f***ed. Excluding the what seems to be guaranteed parry if you attack him whilst his shield is up, he has three main attacks that he'll perform when he has his sword in hand. The first just being a regular combo, throwing anywhere between 2 to 7 swings. If you guess that number wrong, by the way, good luck, because he's 100% faster than you and will burst your ass. The second being a small tracking dart if you're too far away to damage him, and also coincidentally being the best opportunity to punish him and damage. The third, he decides to become the most anime f***er in the world, throwing wild swings like Kirito vs Gleam Eyes anywhere up to 3 times in a row. F***ing 3 in a row? The saving grace, though, is the theme. The theme is a banger. Yuka Kitamura, you didn't have to go from Anakin's betrayal to you're gonna f***ing die. You didn't have to go so hard with it, but you did. Overall, his attack style is just to throw a random amount of shit at you, which makes the fight a massive pain to get through, but it could be worse. He could clone himself 3 times like the Crystal Sage. Before writing this script, I wrote down some of my opinions and lore entries to better reinforce the order. For Crystal Sage, the only opinion I wrote was that he's just a bit of a bitch. The Crystal Sage is, as Vinx quite rightly said, a boss that you either destroy or get destroyed by, and unfortunately I ended up on the wrong side of that coin. There's not much lore to go along with the Sage, apart from the fact that he was taught by Big Hat Logan and trained the Abyss Watchers to use magic, which explains the existence of Farron spells, which, I will admit, made this boss more than just a roadblock for me. It is also said that he's twins with the Grand Archive Sage, which is why I went back there off camera and exterminated the whole bloodline. Going back into the fight though, there really isn't a lot for me to say. It's just one that on paper should be a piece of piss to get through, but for some reason just finds itself on the wrong side of most people's opinion. There's definitely room for a lot of potential. For example, if the Sage used some classic spells that players may have used at that point, like Heavy Soul Arrow or Soul Greatsword, or even some Farron spells since the lore ties them to him, but he just chooses to sit there and spam projectiles. Manageable, definitely manageable, but when there are 4 Sages all spamming projectiles, that's when the fight can get annoying. You'll fight the main Sage for a bit and then back off for a safe spot to heal, just to get blasted by a second Sage, so move somewhere out of harm's way from both of them just to get blasted by a third Sage. It just doesn't make for a good fight, and altogether just seems a bit curse-rotten. Confession time. When I talked about the Witches of Hemwick last boss rank, I said that they're a boss that you can happily go through an entire run and not be bothered that you missed them. I immediately got keyboard warriored and told that they give you the Rune Workshop tool, which allows you to reinforce weapons with runes, giving damage boosts and status effects. In this context, The fight with the curse-rotted Greatwood is exactly like the fight with the Witches of Hemwick. The curse-rotted Greatwood's fight to me is just tedious. To begin with, the Hollows praising him aren't terrifically fun to deal with, yet aren't a massive threat for where you are in the game. You've just gone through the entire undead settlement killing them blindly so you could use their souls to buy yourself a funny new helmet.
I have come to claim the souls of Friede.
But their constant respawning does get painful.
I got you now, SpongeBob!
However, focusing on the boss, the exploration in terms of his body is quite a good gimmick fight. There are only a few spots that take real damage, and breaking them off breaks a chunk of health off. It's just a shame that the wide sweeping attacks and AoEs aren't too well telegraphed, and the previously mentioned Hollows take this fight from a C to a hard E-. The second phase sort of ramps up the tempo, he grows a hand for a cock and sometimes forgets how to stand, but altogether the sluggishness sort of lets this boss down a bit. But it's not as bad as it could be due to the Transpose and Kill, an item that when given to Ludleth and Corland can be used to transpose boss souls into weapons, shields or rings, an extremely good item to have. It's just a shame that the boss that grants it is tedious and boring. If I had to describe him in one sentence, it would be a boss you fight to make the game more fun. However, because of the vastness of weapons available and the nature of the kill having no tighter weapon improvement, unlike Bloodborne's Rune Workshop, I instead say it's a boss you can happily go through an entire run and not be bothered that you missed them. The champions Gravetender and Gravetender Greatwolf sit at number 21 and is most likely the least memorable boss on this list. I went to you guys for some opinions on bosses to better gauge the community standings and saw this post about someone who managed to complete a full no summon run. But then he further comments that he completely forgot that this boss existed and beat his ass in 10 seconds. With him being optional, there isn't a lot of lead up and just seems to be placed there so that the Ashes of Ariandel isn't a one boss DLC. In all honesty, there is some good foreshadowing. Twice on your journey of Ariandel you'll run into a massive wolf. Whether this is actually the Gravetender Greatwolf or not I'm unsure, but would seem to be as if you beat both of them prior to the boss, you get 15% of his HP taken off, which in fairness is an interesting mechanic and benefits those who decide to brave the fights ahead instead of running through them. It's just a shame that this means that anyone going into the boss fight is just doing the exact same thing that they've done twice before. The surrounding area of Ariandel seems very similar to Cainhurst for me. If you just stuck a castle anywhere, it wouldn't look too out of place. But the fight itself just doesn't have the wow factor that Ligarius had. If I say that it's an asset reuser, I think most people will get where I'm coming from. You fight like 50 million wolves before reaching the boss, so why have 3 more here? And the fact that they have the same moveset as Dark Souls dogs also doesn't help. A massive wolf boss, very similar to Sif. I understand that they can't just remake him, but it just didn't hit for me. The Wolves moveset, most of the time, features a couple of charges followed by a breath attack. Seem familiar to anyone? Yeah, it's literally just the same attack that Vordt has. Not to mention the PvP aspect. Here is a list of all the PvP fights up until this boss and whether or not I fought them. It does have a good little DPS check aspect to it though. If you can't burst through the mini-wolves and the Gravetender catches up with you and you most likely die. If you can't burst through the Gravetender, the Greatwolf catches up with you and you most likely die. And if for some reason you decide to burst the Greatwolf before the Gravetender, the second phase keeps you far too preoccupied with dodging and the Gravetender will catch up with you and you most likely die. 2 things I love about this boss that bump them up a bit is A, the theme, and B, the arena. The theme has no right to go off that hard for a boss that is mediocre at best, found at the bottom of a Mario Brothers jumping puzzle, to the point I almost just had it as the fight theme in the video. Alongside the great expanses of the arena, the amazing environment offers a wide open area if you don't want to fight too close quarters and a large structure in the middle, which I'm led to believe is the same structure in which you fight Priscilla if you don't want to fight in the open. Very useful for the Greatwolf and Gravetender respectively. That being said, it's just a generic NPC fight really late into the game, a boss number booster, a Gravetender that could never be a High Lord. I have a real sweet spot for Wolnir. I just have a real appreciation for him. I understand that he isn't difficult, he isn't fun at most, and just kind of gets in the way, but look at him, he's just a goofy little skeleton guy that vapes a lot. Look at him go! On a real, this is the first entry that I'm going to include the journey from the previous boss to this one, because the Catacombs of Karthus are one of my least liked areas. Just to go through a small list of enemies present, we have skeletons, ninjas, bulls, rats, Beyblades, and a literal f***ing army. In terms of the lore, it's one of my favourite stories to read. Lord Wolnir was once a conqueror and would spread his ideals amongst his army that victory was the only thing to matter in battle, the means was not. After countless battles in which his swordsmen dazzled opponents by moving as weightlessly as a grain of sand, he conquered kingdoms and ground the respective rulers' crowns to dust, making them one and himself the High Lord. He sentenced countless souls to death, which eventually led him into the abyss to look for darker pyromancies. He eventually fell deep into it where he felt fear and prayed to the gods the first time. He did not have control of the abyss that he found himself in, and his swords and bracelet run in comfort, perhaps the latter immunity from it, as after the rings are destroyed, he loses control and plummets into the abyss. The fight does not reflect these entries. I think if after destroying more and more bracelets his movements, attack patterns or attack choice either got more enraged, desperate or focused, then the attack would be up there. Adapting a fight based on specific circumstances or health pools makes the fight less predictable and altogether better in my opinion. But since the skeletons aren't much issue, he just swings his arms aimlessly and all the attacks he has to offer that give much threat are either a singular sword AoE or a vape cloud that he most likely doesn't get a chance to cast. It means his fight just isn't as fun as most others, and that puts him pretty similar to the Ancient Wyvern. It's a fight that wouldn't make the game too dissimilar if he just wasn't there. Bar the Grave Warden's Pyromancy Tome, you could just throw on top of the Grave Warden's ashes found elsewhere in Karthus. Just because I have an appreciation for him and he makes the Irithyll view just a bit sweeter, doesn't mean that this lord gets to sit above a king. Then, from the dark, they came, and found the souls of the lords within the flame, the Witch of Izalith and her daughters of chaos. But soon the flames will fade, and only the dark will remain. As the flame faded, the Witch of Izalith attempted to use her soul to recreate the first flame, resulting in the Chaos Flame. When she was unable to control it, she was consumed by it and transformed into the Bed of Chaos. Demons were born of the Bed of Chaos, but the flame had not survived, and the demons are a dying race. And as fire fades, leaves only shriveled up clumps of burnt ash, one being the old Demon King, the last living witness of the chaos of Izalith. The old Demon King stands ground in the smouldering lake, the last known refuge of the demons, housing all sorts of Easter eggs towards Dark Souls 1, most notably with the boss room where you can see the presence of countless fallen Capra demons, stray demons, Taurus demons, even the Centipede demon. As one of the last of his kind, he never backs down, never gives up.
Amazing!
And stands his ground to the player, eventually being forced to expel all the power he has left at 10%, in which he sits there, immobile, unable to even pick up the hammer he'd used prior, a king who has lost his kingdom. The storytelling for the old Demon King for me is amongst some of the best in Dark Souls 3. Bed of Chaos dead in Dark Souls 1, the demons start to die out, losing their flame. The prime example of this being the stray demon upon Lothric Wall. Instead of following on from the demon Fire Sage, standing tall to guard Izalith with power, surrounded by flame, he instead sits upon the wall to guard Lothric, instead shriveled up to ash, now lacking even a trace of flame. Does the fight reflect these entries? In terms of him being shriveled and weak, kinda, yeah. The fight, in a word, is fine. There isn't a lot to harm you in this area bar the Dune reference. What on earth? To the massive crossbow. Just stick behind him and hit him a couple of times. When he does a close hit, just roll out of the way. If he summons fire, walk on the hill and you're good. If you start summoning meteors, Joestar's secret technique. That's literally the entire fight. Just make sure you watch out for his nuke attack. The method of getting to him, in my opinion, offers one of the best ways to a secret area, breaking the bridge and using it as a ladder down to the remains of Izalith. So good they had to reuse it in Ashes of Ariandel. But altogether, the storytelling of the old Demon King, Izalith, and the fall of the demon race puts him in good stead, but the fight itself keeps him low. It doesn't help that you only get 25,000 souls for the win, an amount with this portion of the game won't at all make you rich. Aldritch. The third Lord of Cinder you go up against is Aldritch, but he is without a doubt universally the worst of the four. That being said, there is a large amount of variety to Aldrich's fight, and there are never two that are the same. His name, the Devourer of Gods, lives up to the reputation as he reps the upper body of Gwyndolin and uses the large soul spear, the Gravelord sword tip of Nito, and even has the Lythhunt scythe of Priscilla. Alongside this, you fight him in Anor Londo, specifically the Ornstein and Smough boss room, years after Dark Souls 1. There is even theory to suggest that he is Smough, due to them both having a man-eating nature, and that Smough was the last of Gwyn's knights to abandon his post, suggesting he may have never left. You can even find Smough's great hammer in Irithyll, and the Shrine Handmaiden will sell you his armour after beating Aldritch. Whilst there is an attack variety, in the first phase the predictability of the fight is massive, as Aldritch most of the time will either send out arrows, small homing projectiles, or both, followed by the physical attack that should be dodged at this point in the game. In second phase, however, the attacks gain more power, but the predictability stays the same. The arrows now follow you, and for longer, instead of just spreading out in a cone. The projectiles become greater in number, and he buffs his sword with fire, but it's still just a case of avoid one, maybe two projectile attacks in a physical, and you're free to damage. Even if you opt to go for damage, all Aldritch does is cast an AoE and disappears to the other side of the boss room just to do it over and over again. The fight is quite simply a pain to get through. Whilst he is a Lord of Cinder, thank goodness the other three are top tier, because otherwise Aldritch drags the title down heavily. And thank goodness we kill him before he consumed another kid. Oceiros, the Consumed King, once King of Lothric, found research of Seath the Scaleless in the Grand Archives, and became obsessed with using his royal blood for higher purpose, consumed by the desire to study and gain the power of dragons. As the fight with Oceiros progresses, you see how this desire for the power of dragons has driven him to the brink of insanity, talking to an apparent child called Ocelot but cradling nothing. Perhaps through the experiments he fuses with Ocelot, explaining the audible crying, or perhaps Oceiros just lost Ocelot to experimentation or neglect, yet in his mind, obsessed with greater purpose, refuses to believe otherwise. The idea of his royal stature does not elude him, calling the player ignorant slave, and in the beginning Oceiros is slow, using calculated, intelligent attacks with his staff, even using magic on occasion, not wanting to give up his child of dragons. Because of this, the first phase can simply be boiled down to beating up an old man. There's little threat, but threat all the same. Yet as the battle continues, Oceiros asks where Ocelot is.
Have you seen my son?
As he becomes aware of his empty arms. Under this realization, he slams his hands to the ground. Either his dragon side is kicked in and all sense of humanity has been lost, or the reminder of his loss of Ocelot sent him into a fury-fueled rampage, attacking in a more frantic, tantrum-esque manner. It's at this point the fight becomes faster and improves in the boss status quite well. While the pace increases, the hitboxes are confusing, the arena is too small so he can corner you easily, and you will always get hit by his charge attack since he gives no telegraphed wind-up. It's still a boss that will wall a few people and will require some trial and error to beat though. All things considered, this fight will assist in improving dodge timings. Attacks in phase 2 are long and fluid, meaning any panic rolling will result in a roll catch, and since there's very heavy reference to Seath, some saying Oceiros is the reincarnation of, it's interesting to think that if Seath wasn't so big and immobile, this might have been what the fight had looked like. Despite the negatives of this fight, there is always a way to win. There is always a way to use the surroundings, parry windows, or cooldown periods to gently whittle down a boss to nothing. In Oceiros' case, this would be to sit in the corner and spray him with Febreze for half an hour. The Deacons of the Deep are found in what is probably my favourite area in the whole game. Spending more time there, it really grew on me. A massive part of the game, twisty-turny hallways, brilliant enemy placement, the layout is simple yet complicated, the corridors are easy to navigate, yet if you think you're somewhere that you're not, then chances are you're running into any of the large variety of enemies cluttering the hallways, such as knights, twin-blade hags, evangelists, slugmen, mimics, roadhouse giants, suicidal maniacs, or a spider wolf thing. There's even a rafters area that you really have to go out of your way to find. Playing and editing my time in the cathedral, it kinda gave me Resident Evil 2 police station vibes, a callback to probably one of my favourite series I've ever done. In terms of the Deacons though, although the theme is an absolute banger, it's literally just the celestial emissary with a few less curveballs and a gimmick, and the sheer quantity of the weak as Nate Robinson and the boxing ring Deacons constantly present in both phases sort of hinders the fight a bit. In phase 1, the red light will appear on a random Deacon, and when you kill him a chunk of health goes and the red light will transfer to another Deacon. Rinse and repeat a few times until phase 2 starts. Phase 2 neglects the transferring essence and instead focuses on one Archdeacon who holds the boss's health bar for the remainder of the fight. Throughout the fight, it seems you have two options: either play passively and gently pick off the health bar slowly but surely but get shot by fireballs, attacked by a stray Deacon, or die to a buildup curse, or you could play aggressively, constantly attacking the red Deacon but at the same time having to maul your way through a sea of bog standard Deacons, my blood type is Ragu demons, or lanky bastard Deacons.
Kill yourselves!
Eventually finding yourself in the middle of a Deacon Bukkake. Phase 2 does seem better though, as it provides the fight to be more of a pick and choose your moment rather than a game of hide and seek. One immediate fix that comes to mind would be to have phase 1 as normal, phase 1 is fine, but then when the health pool is reached, all the Deacons die, and that summons an Archdeacon equivalent of St. Clint's from the Archthrones fan mod. I think if that had been the case, top tier fight for me, but unfortunately the Deacons remain too great a number for their own good, and it drops them down for me. Before I move on to the explanation behind Vordt, I just want to say that in all honesty, from this point onwards, the list could have realistically been in whatever order whatsoever until entry number 6, and I would have been happy with the result. With the exception of Iudex Gundyr, Vordt acts as what is most likely the first gatekeeper of the game. I understand that until Elden Ring, the Souls games are very linear in nature, not really allowing you to go from one boss to the next until you've beaten them, but Vordt gatekeeps the primary option of the game. From the High Wall of Lothric, you have two choices. Kill Emma and face the Dancer of Boreal Valley, which in reality will only let you go as far as the Dragonslayer Armour, or Champion Gundyr, as the Grand Archive's key doesn't spawn until 3 Lords of Cinder die. And in all honesty, if you choose this route, I hope you have a spare desk or 7, because there will be casualties. Or you can face the mighty Ice Rhino Vordt and get transported to the Undead Settlement, from there to face the Abyss Watchers, Yhorm and Aldritch, just to name the primary targets. Put simply, if you aren't ready to beat Vordt, apologies, but you aren't ready to go after the Lords. After going through the High Wall and seeing Wyverns, Undead, Winged Knights, Pusset Man, it almost feels like the true tutorial area, rather than the run before Iudex just being a group of robed hollows and a crystal lizard. Much like Iudex then, he acts as the tutorial boss, but much more in the sense that he's a quadrupedal powerhouse that preps you for the fights that require you to read the attacks and pick your window, as being able to dodge his larger attacks grants the reward of a larger attack window. His attacks in first phase are relatively simple to read, traditionally being only hammer swings and slams, so if you're all familiar with the age-old, tried and tested strat of sticking to his curvaceous, sumptuous arse like glue for 2 minutes, and you're living the life of luxury. However, he isn't just going to sit there and take it. After all, if you're going after the Lords, he's got to give you some challenge, right? Phase 2's theme is probably my favourite of the game, and undoubtedly the most recognised theme in what is probably all of Soulsborne. It ramps up in speed and lets you know that Vordt now means business. Whilst his moveset stays relatively the same, he now implements a set of 3 charges, which decimates your health if you get hit by even one, and followed by his breath attack, and the added feature of giving you frostbite if you stick too close for him for too long. This part of the fight almost throws the foundation of every boss feature at you at once: high damage, fast speed, status conditions, and in that sense hones your dodging, reaction time and ability to adapt from a really early point in the game. It's a shame that Vordt is a bit squishy from this early on in the game, as myself, as well as a lot of others, think that if Vordt had been implemented elsewhere, maybe you'd have a weaker version of him as a mini-boss somewhere in Irithyll, then he would have really tried and tested a lot of people to the edge of their ability. For example, and I quote, "If it was a late game fight, if we had a few more moves, he would have felt more like Ludwig than a cleric beast." However, Vordt is an amazing second tutorial boss, but it's his early positioning and relatively easy fight that ironically gatekeeps him at his spot at 15, right below his fellow Boy of the Boreal Valley. Speaking of the Boys of the Boreal Valley, Dancer comes in next on the list. Sorry, the one reborn returns to the list. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley is pretty much the Champion Gundyr equivalent to Vordt's Iudex Gundyr. Vordt prepares you for the early game with large yet mostly avoidable attacks which help develop early skill, but the main one I mentioned at the end was the ability to read the attacks and pick your window. With the Dancer, this is very much the case. The Dancer acts as the late game gatekeeper, not letting you reach the final Lord of Cinder until you've bested her. Her attacks contrary Vordt's to the ends of the earth. While one was fast, clunky, almost random at times, the other goes about attacking methodically, intelligently, and to put it in a word, elegantly. The elegance of the fight continues as the player attacks. She'll spin around and attack seamlessly along with follow-ups that can really catch you off guard. Especially with some of the attacks' reach limit, they're a lot further than you think. But there's a certain eeriness with Dancer. The boss theme is almost just a singular violin playing with high-pitched vocals, and throughout the whole fight, her footsteps echo around the arena. Poke, poke, seemingly in time with the music until you reach second phase. Here she'll pull out a second dark-laden sword from the ground and set the whole room on fire, but doesn't follow traditional second phase mannerisms. Normally, for bosses like Vordt, Oceiros and Greatwolf, to name a few, will turn almost feral in second phase, abandoning all rhyme and reason and attacking with all of their might in a flurry of random unstructured patterns. The Dancer instead decides to keep dancing, continuing to flow elegantly throughout the arena, continuing her attacks with the same rhyme and reason they had before, yet seemingly more calculated to catch you out. AoEs always seem to find a way to hit you, and her swings leave small windows for opportunity, but not in a way that she'll swing and lose control. The control is always hers. If Vordt taught you dodge timings and picking your window with fast yet clumsy attacks, the Dancer reinforces these ideas with calculated movements and smaller opportunity, resulting in a brilliant fight to prepare you for the last Lord of Cinder, the Twin Prince. The final Lord of Cinder you go up against is technically, depending on the order of things you want to do, then the penultimate boss of the game, and is definitely the hardest of the four. I feel it best to go about this boss from start to finish as to best get my thoughts portrayed in the best light. The Grand Archives is an amazingly complex area, and reminded me of the inner corridors and rooms of Canehurst, followed on by a long roam across rooftops, normal-ish enemies, ghosts, and an amazing boss to finish. In terms of the bonfire run back, I wasn't a massive fan of the gauntlet, I called it, where you go from the Grand Archives bonfire, hang a right to go up the lift, and then go through a large barricaded walkway full of hollows and Lothric Knights that 9 times out of 10 will take at least a little bit of health off you before reaching the boss room. All of this because I neglected to turn right just before the boss room and unlock a shortcut that would have saved me a massive amount of hassle. For the first phase, there is a legal obligation for everyone to quote alongside Lothric entering the boss room.
Oh dear. Another dogged contender.
He speaks the bullshit.
And the younger prince declares that they care not for the mantle of lords, and seemingly abandon their duty as a Lord of Cinder before you find exclusively Lorien, the elder prince. And he hits like a truck. Yes, he hits hard, but granted his attacks are readable and easily dodgeable, especially with the teleport not unlocking your camera, but one wrong move and you're getting hit hard. Normally he'll go for standard swings of his sword, sometimes comboing into a teleport, and sometimes with a big overhead AoE slam, kinda similar to Ludwig's. The like you've seen a million times before, so you should be beating this phase relatively easily. However, once you kill him for the first time, he gets resurrected by Lothric, who now also joins the fight. Lorien enters an embered state and ignites his blade, the same one that managed to defeat the Demon Prince once. This second phase is the biggest test of consistency and stamina I have faced in this game. Not only do you have to whittle down Lorien to get the best shot at damaging Lothric, but Lorien then gets resurrected again to continue the fight and will keep getting resurrected indefinitely until Lothric is the one to die, adding to the fact that if you get caught up in a rough spot, Lothric will throw projectiles and tracking darts your way if you build up any semblance of distance. The fight becomes more of a marathon than a sprint. The best way to beat phase 2 is just to kill Lothric. If you do so, then Lorien also dies as a result, even if he's at full health. So when Lorien is the one to take most of your attacking force for 95% of the fight, it means that you rarely, if ever, get a shot at Lothric without having downed Lorien first, making the fight less of a marathon and more of a Sisyphean task. The projectiles and the melee swings make the Twin Princes at a very basic level a better Aldritch fight for me, and cements himself as the penultimate story boss. It almost ends a brilliant story, which started all the way back at Iudex. Catharsis. The process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or a I did the same bit for Lawrence, you get the point. What I mean by catharsis is not that I found him hard the first time I fought him in the series. As a matter of fact, I beat him on my first run. Look, it says so right there. What I mean by catharsis is that I found him impossibly hard the very first time that I fought him, all the way back prior to this video. In order to reach the high wall, I had to go through Gundyr, and it took me genuinely like 3 days of constant attempts to get through him, to the point I was almost about to uninstall the game. This video was my very first experience with what Soulsborne game was like, and from the word go, I was not a fan. Yet no, I know that this video came after I edited it a long time after recording, please believe me. Returning to present day, and my run through Gundyr felt like when Paul throws Chimchar away just for Chimchar to come back as Infernape and utterly butt his elective eye into submission. It felt good. And yes, whilst it only took one attempt, the fight is what is probably the greatest tutorial boss in the entirety of the FromSoft universe. He introduces the players to both sides of combat that he'll face throughout the game, one being parryable humanoid enemies that are methodical and tactical with their attacks, and the second being more dodge-centered beastish enemies that have a lot more aggression, and refining both is a very solid product to this fight. This mimics the fight as he starts off normal as a standard knight who uses a halberd to swipe at you with the occasional grab/punch. The second phase brings in the Pus of Man form, a large snake-like creature that's meant to be of the abyss. Beating these phases grants you the coiled sword and access to Firelink Shrine, and from there the entirety of the rest of the game. Not being able to beat Gundyr is essentially a theme park attendant saying, "Sorry kid, you're not tall enough to ride," which seems really fitting, seeing that the Greek word for judge just so happens to be Iudex, a lone soldier sitting before Firelink ready to judge as to whether players are capable of beating the game. The lore goes into why this is so much more interesting, however we've got a bit of a gap before we go into why that is. Warning, warning, this is the majorly controversial spot. If you don't like things that aren't of your opinion, skip to this time. Again, this is the majorly controversial spot. I really like Yhorm, however this spot was one of the hardest for me to place, because while I like Yhorm as a boss, I had to really consider where he fits in if Siegward didn't exist. And yes, whilst the storyline of meeting Siegward in the Undead Settlement, having suit with him in Irithyll, and then freeing him from the profane jail is one of the more universally renowned side quests,
because he's my best friend, he's my pal. He's my homeboy, my rotten soldier. He's my sweet cheese, my good time boy.
Yhorm has a very interesting story of his own that not a lot of people talk about. Once the leader of the profane capital and son of a great conqueror, possibly Wolnir, he became the sword and shield for the humans who lived there. He attempted to bring the fire to the capital, but a curse from descendants of an oracle accidentally created the profaned flame which incinerated naught but human flesh. After this, Yhorm threw out his shield and added one notch to his machete, explaining why his boss soul can be used for Yhorm's great shield, yet we never see him use it. He also used to use 2 storm rulers, however before becoming a Lord of Cinder to put out the profane flame, he gave one to the humans that doubted him, and the other to a dear friend. As we know, Sigurd possesses one in aid of his promise of ending Yhorm's suffering if he ever comes back to life, and the other can be found on a human corpse at the back of the room, indicating that the humans attempted to end Yhorm to no avail. Starting off with the main negative, the profane capital could have done with some real overhauling. The Abyss Watchers got, considered a poison swamp level, a really fleshed out Dark Souls 1 reference, Twin Princes got the very top of Lothric Castle, and Aldritch got f***ing Anor Londo, so Yhorm getting a tower, 2 paths and a hand baby seemed a bit of a kick in the teeth, but having never played Dark Souls 2, I wasn't expecting much giant fan service, so I digress. The fight itself could either be one of the easiest or hardest fights in the game, depending on whether you choose to use the Storm Rule or not. But even if you do choose to go down the easier route, Yhorm still puts up a good fight, swinging his machete with passion and sometimes making you forget he is a giant, therefore his giant machete is going to have extra reach. If you go into the fight with the assumption of, I'm going to beat this without Storm Ruler, you've got to be really attentive and pace yourself for probably a 10-minute fight, being consistent throughout. If you go into it thinking, I am going to use the Storm Ruler, a good little callback to the Demon Souls boss Storm King, then you have to pick and choose your windows of opportunity well. After all, it won't let you just blast him constantly like Demon Souls. No, there's a build-up that takes time, meaning you actually have to think about what you're doing. 2 equally viable strategies, yet 2 equally restricting caveats. For me though, the storytelling of the boss is a real treat, and why he's so far up in my list, even with the theme giving off vibes of a warrior disgraced fighting to keep his kingdom alive that he lost so many years ago. Again, I realise that it's controversial for him to be where he is, and while that is mostly to do with Sigurd being around, I would honestly consider Sigurd to be an optional extra and therefore an extension of the boss. It's not like if you free him from the well in the cathedral, he'll help you with the Deacons, or if you have soup with him in Irithyll, he'll help you with Pontiff. No, he's intertwined with Yhorm and Yhorm alone, giving the boss an extra layer of enjoyment for me. If I'd have gone without, then I'd have just gone from point A to point B, killed the thing and continued as usual. With Sigurd being around, it made me explore the game more, building that relationship and altogether making the boss a more enjoyable and rewarding experience. That being said, I do really like Yhorm, but with Sigurd putting him on a pedestal, he gets gate-kept a bit, putting him no further than number 10. He's not quite a Dragonslayer. The Dragonslayer Armour, or DSA, right off the bat is probably one of my favourite boss designs in the game, and the theme is final boss tier brilliant. First impressions are just perfect. After seeing the Pilgrim Butterfly clear the area and let you two go mano a mano, you may find that you struggle initially only due to his attack style. Remember with Iudex, I said that he'll introduce you to the more humanoid calculated bosses, as well as flailing beast type bosses? Well, whilst DSA is a humanoid being, he doesn't hold the mannerisms of a calculated attack style. He goes about things with the motto, I wield big thing and hits little thing with big thing. With the previous 3 bosses you've faced, most likely being Pontiff, then Aldritch, then Dancer, there'll be a basic instinct that DSA will behave himself in a similar way. So when he comes at you with a massive cleaver and shield, swinging them both recklessly, putting himself off balance half the time, definitely comes as a shock, especially when you bring him to his knees thinking you've riposted him, just to get the full force of a Gundyr clothesline from hell for your efforts. The mitigating factor being that after a combo he'll need some time to recover and give you, with the exception of last ditch AoEs, the best attack windows for a boss. But as always, if you mess timings up slightly, then he'll either hit you full on and put you out of action for a bit, or especially in phase 2, the butterflies will shoot the f*** out of you and you'll lose all momentum. There isn't a lot of lore for the armour that I could find, considering that his name is Dragonslayer Armour. I can imagine he was part of Gwyn's Legion, repurposed to defend the Grand Archive since dragons don't exist in Lothric, and could hold some merit due to another one being found in the Ring City coincidentally right before the gauntlet where you first meet Midir, an actual dragon. The only piece of lore I have written down in my notes is head empty. The armour doesn't actually have anyone in it at all. The pilgrim butterflies that fly alongside inside the boss possess it, which explains the unorthodox attack and flailing nature. The lights are on, but there is absolutely no one at home. It is as sharp as a knife. The wheels are turning, but the hamsters are 100% dead. One thing I kind of wanted to do after discovering the true use of the transposing kiln, I did want to use a boss weapon, settling on the Hollowslayer Greatsword. But if I had to go back and do the run again, I'd save a Pale Tongue, reallocate my stats to give 40 strength, and go bonking with the Dragonslayer Great Axe. The sheer power of this weapon, described by Snuppet as nuclear warhead inbound, absolutely chunks the out of most bosses with its skill called Falling Bolt. At +2, the weapon was hitting this skill for about 1833 against Aldritch and parrying the Crystal Sage for 1632. The Dragonslayer Armour is a brilliant boss for me, well deserving of reaching the top 10, and was a brilliant return to the story bosses after Champion. This is the first point in the list that I'll throw in a subject to change text at the top corner, only to signify that this is me writing my ranking immediately after having beaten the game. I beat Solo Cinder on the evening of the 2nd of August, and I'm writing this on the afternoon of the 3rd. Put simply, because I beat Champion on my 2nd attempt, I feel my opinion of him may not be fully formed. Very similarly to Amygdala, who I beat run 1, but other people struggled with to no end, so I may not have experienced a full and proper fight with a champion. Or I'm just that good and you all need to acknowledge me. Champion Gundyr was an absolutely perfect halfway boss, even to the number. Iudex Gundyr was the first boss in which I fought, and Champion was the 14th, which to me is as close to the midway point of 25 as you can get. After discovering the secret door behind Oceiros' boss room, you're led to a familiar location. It seems to be the Cemetery of Ash, and while it technically is, you can see the entrance from the game's start, it's all darkened out, which gives a sense of foreshadowing. Renamed to the Untended Graves, you follow on and see an all too familiar figure kneeling down in what you've now deduced is Iudex. Champion, which I'm going to refer to him from now on, brings an entirely new fight to you. Instead of a reserved introductory Iudex, he's now the champion, a honed warrior that will rush you quickly, hit you hard and give you no room to heal at all. The humanoid, methodical and calculated nature of base Iudex, but the constant aggression and power of second phase Iudex whilst keeping his humanoid form, taking in the damage you deal to him and retaliating with much greater force. At its basic level, Iudex teaches you the skills. Champion will grind you to the point of exhaustion to master them. I mentioned the lore of Gundyr earlier, and this is where we get into it. An unkindled risen too late, he arrived at Firelink to see the fire gone and the Firekeeper dead. He now sits at the base of Firelink to challenge any other risen unkindled that oppose him, referring back to the Iudex Judge Link. After all, the amount of references to history repeating itself in Dark Souls are insane. In terms of whether this is the future or past, there are arguments for both. For Champion being in the past, he's called Champion, suggesting that he's in his prime, attacking more ferociously than the slower, lethargic Iudex. The Blackout could also be the Abyss, which eventually finds itself residing in Champion, producing the pus of man form that Iudex has. As for the Champion being in the future, for one, we fight him after Iudex, so the timeline is there, and receiving the coiled sword fragment after suggests that the coiled sword that we placed there has withered away and fractured into pieces. Not to mention the Cemetery of Ash now housing only a couple of Cathedral Grave Wardens, turning them to the Untended Graves. Either way, the arena and the fight itself are phenomenal, especially when he hits second phase and suddenly decides that he's done playing and you need to die.
Come get ya some crunchy, boy.
Brilliantly telegraphed and altogether a lot of fun. It feels like each kick/shoulder bash naturally transitions in from combos with momentum rather than just a slideshow of moves. Although if I had a penny for every time I got caught by his uppercut roundhouse combo.
Be gone!
Oh my god, what a f***ing combo. I'd have 2 pennies. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. I'm actually surprised that he doesn't take a leaf out of the Mimic's book and go straight for a punt. Punt if... Right, I'm going to stop with the name transitions now. At this point they're too hard and it's just too forced. Pontiff Sulyvahn was the first major wall for me, and it shows in the fact that he was the first boss to take me into double digits in terms of run total. Yes, I realise the Crystal Sage took 20 tries, but I don't count that on the basis the Sage is just a massive twat. He is, from my research, the only boss that actively tries to stop the linking of the fire, as he's implied to be the first scholar of the Grand Archives, and therefore convinced Lothric of the Twin Princes to abandon their duty as Lords of Cinder, which initiates the the reasoning for us awakening at the cemetery. He places Outrider Knights at various spots around the game, and even placed Vordt and Dancer to gatekeep any unkindled ash from ever leaving the High Wall. I also had the thought that, at least in my head, Pontiff lured Gwyndolin into Cathedral of the Deep for Aldritch to eat. He gave the small doll to the Deacons as an extra obstacle in your journey to defeat Aldritch. But after asking whether my thought process was right, I got a glimpse at how vastly differently the lore can imply things, as someone responded, and I quote, "Why would Sulyvahn prevent the linking of the fire when he's the literal leader of the Way of White, and that is the source of his power through the world? Vordt, the Dancer, and the Outrider Knights came to Lothric invited to fix the mess going on inside the kingdom that had forced the elites to send out a request for help to Irithyll. Sulyvahn definitely wasn't into Aldritch Cult of the Deep, because given his entire character, he would never leave the power and control he had acquired through his life to someone else. Aldritch, in fact, entered the barrier of Irithyll by force, not invited. Aldrich's small doll is left behind in the Cathedral of the Deep. He went inside the city, smashing the door without even knocking. This was brilliant to read, not because someone had told me a definitive story, but because there probably is no definitive story. The lore is there and present, but the order in which entries slide into one another and the story they can tell altered drastically, creating an entirely different experience altogether. But onto Pontiff as a fight, there is a clear and obvious reason why Pontiff took me so long. The previous few bosses I had faced leading up to Pontiff were lacking in either difficulty or interest, apart from the Abyss Watchers, all standard dodge-centered fights. But Pontiff brought an end to that long line of boring, and certainly wasn't dodge-centered. I mean, he can be if you're good enough, but at this point I hadn't got the full hang of it, and Pontiff's long fluid combos had a tendency to roll catch me at every opportunity. So instead I had to abandon my previous hit and hope strategies and rely on an entirely different method of fighting altogether. Parrying. This is the reason it took me 35 attempts, because I hadn't had any experience in parrying up until this point. And whilst I may not have used parrying often enough after the fight...
Take that, sir! Behold a grown man weeping like...
That? That was your plan? Are you crying?
Yes, I'm crying. He hit me with a chair.
There is no way I would have beaten Champion Gundyr's second run if I hadn't got that parry off, especially when Pontiff hits second phase and pulls out Shadow Clone Jutsu. The clone can give you plenty of notice as to when you can parry Pontiff, granted, but the extra breathing room the parry gives you is definitely a welcome addition. If you get caught though, good luck, because you've got the same hard-hitting combos coming at you but twice as often. I'd thought of Pontiff initially as a wall boss, mostly because Vince and Jacob said it would be my first wall, also because there was a PvP set afterwards, but in hindsight he was a learning curve. He took me into the fight thinking I'd struggle and instead took me aside and said, look, this may not be working, so experiment. Use different methods, maybe try this, and it worked. My ability to adapt after that improved, and then I tried to parry the PvP fights, and even decided to switch around weapons later on to improve damage, which, highlight, caused me to beat Gael insanely early due to the Hollowslayer Greatsword doing bonus damage to hollows.
Gasp. I never would have guessed.
Wrapping up this entry though, I think Pontiff looks amazing, the boss arena is absolutely astounding, and is a brilliant way to finish off Irithyll, which is, joint with the Cathedral, my absolute favourite area of the game, and I wouldn't have done nearly as well in later fights if I hadn't fought him when I did. The Demon in Pain and the Demon from Below, merging to the Demon Prince, is a brilliant beginning to the Ring City DLC, and is backed up by plentiful Dark Souls references prior, from traversing the ashed over ruins of Dark Souls 2's Earthen Peak, even if it is a poisonous swamp level with angels that can go f*** themselves, to jumping into the boss room which coincidentally happens to be the ruins of Dark Souls 1's Filing Shrine. The fight itself, in Phase 1, consists of the smaller demons pursuing you, but the majority of the time never together. One will enrage with flame and go for melee strikes, and the other will burn out, sitting behind and throwing poison cloud attacks, which means you have to be good with your dodging but also vigilant with spatial awareness. The demons fight is an absolutely perfect testament to the quality of most of the gang fights Dark Souls 3 has. The two demons have perfect synergy. It's very similar to Sister Friede Phase 2, another fight considered universally to be great, and the Abyss Watchers, who go from a 1v1 to a 2v1 but brings it up to a 2v2. Yes, the Deacons of the Deep and the Crystal Sage may drag the standard down a bit, but if you consider other entries into this category, Rom has an infinite number of spiders that kamikaze you, the Celestial Emissary has blue goobers constantly chasing you, and the Capra Demon has two pet dogs that need to be put down immediately. The demons fall on the right side of almost the entire community though. I've never seen an opinion of the demons and the Demon Prince that isn't top 10 tier boss. Returning to the classic slap that booty strap, the Demon in Pain and Demon from Below can be taken care of without too much hassle. They'll certainly test you, but at this point it shouldn't be too hard, and when you kill them both, second phase begins. Demons can share memories, and so those that remember the Demon Prince that fell to Prince Lorien have the ability to rekindle the Chaos Flame, creating a new Demon Prince. Wait, you did kill the demon from below first, right? Because the demon prince that comes forth in this second phase varies massively depending on which demon you killed first. If you killed Pain first, you'll get the sun summoning fireball demon, but if you killed below first, you'll get laser demon prince, widely regarded the easier of the two. This makes the fight very similar to Yhorm in the sense that depending on the way you choose to go about the fight could result in either a brilliant spectacle and a brilliant experience, or you getting arse f***ed by fireballs all day. Me, being an epic god gamer though, took the sun variant and beat it first try.
Ooh, you're hard, showing off.
Although, as I said in the Demon Prince video, that's why the Demon Prince is also a very hard one for me to place. The fight, arena, build-up, it's all amazing, but the fact that I beat it first try, especially with being around 23 levels below the recommended level cap, means that the Demon Prince drops a few spots, although I cannot deny the quality. So if I'd have fought him a few more times in a second playthrough, who knows? He may have reached the peak. Before we get started on the list from here, I do have to say that there can be an argument made for every single one of the bosses from this point onwards being the number one spot. I had to have a real long think about the order from here. But first, I don't know how controversial this may seem to most, but I absolutely adore the Abyss Watchers. They are without a question my favourite Lord of Cinder, and barely miss out on my favourite main game boss. The Abyss Watchers were a perfect way to hook the player back into the game for me, with the previous bosses being Sage, Greatwood, and for some Deacons, not to mention the poison swamp area of Farron Keep and the massive crabs of the Road of Sacrifices. Oh, that way! The interest of any first-time player would be running low at this point, and especially with the invader spree that I had was the case for myself too. So once I figured out you had to extinguish the three flames, which all have a reference to the Witch of Izalith, Nito, and Four Kings, coming into the boss room and seeing the Abyss Watchers scrapping each other, I knew I was in for a good test of strength. As I said previously with Demon Prince, the game gets the majority of gank fights perfect, and this is another example of this, as once you manage to dwindle the main Watcher's health low enough, a second Watcher will wake up and attempt to kill you as well. This would bring the fight down a few pegs, until a third Watcher wakes up and starts attacking the other two, making the fight an even 2v2. There's actually a lot of explanation as to why this happened in the game that I missed.
The Undead Legion of Farron is a caravan of undead, sworn by wolf's blood to contain the abyss. The Legion will bury a kingdom at the first sign of exposure. Joyous bunch, really.
Red eyes are a classic sign of the Abyss in Dark Souls 3, and the Abyss Watchers being sworn enemies of would level empires if there was even the slightest glimpse, which is why, due to them sharing the blood of the Wolf Blood Master, who is heavily implied to be Artorias, they constantly resurrect, some with the Abyss, some without, waiting for you to end the cycle. This makes it all the more immersive then, when the Abyss Watcher takes your side has red eyes, whilst the other two don't. When you hit second phase, this blood transition is portrayed by the blood of all the fallen Watchers entering the now main Watcher, who arises, embered, and brings about a brilliant second phase. This being the first boss with a second health bar was definitely a shock to me, especially with the brand new moveset consisting of charging sword attacks with follow-up fire, reminiscent of Bloodborne's Lady Maria, and Artorias overhead slams as if the connection to him wasn't already obvious. This accents the fight and improves upon it significantly, as you now need to be intelligent with your dodging. As the first phase would let you get away with panic rolling sometimes, the second phase punishes that with the follow-up fire, but there's no denying that this fight, only if you choose not to abuse the backstab mechanic, is absolutely gorgeous, and with the music, tragic. The music of this fight by Yuka Kitamura is, for me, a top tier boss theme, and is probably the theme best suited for the boss it's with. No banging drums, no crescendo to a melody of instruments all at once, just a few string instruments and vocals. A tragic theme perfect for the tragic backstory of the Abyss Watchers. A once great legion of knights, powerful enough to link the flame, fusing their souls into one, fighting to keep their land free from the evil of the world, however upon returning to Farron Keep seeing it fell to ruin, the Abyss having crept its way in. A once great legion of knights, now relegated to a cycle of reawakening, to fight the Abyss residing within one another, over and over again. Wrapping up the Abyss Watchers, their high placement may seem a bit too high for most, but A, this to me is an absolutely wonderful fight that reignited my enjoyment for the game, and B, fuck off, it's my list. I'm just a sucker for a tragic backstory for a boss. It makes me empathise with them, and the theme, again one of my favourites of the game, as well as the attack style, design and nature of the arena, there's really no other way I can say it. I just adore the Abyss Watchers. But he does only slightly miss out on the top 5. The second and final boss of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC is without a doubt the better of the two. I mean, the champion's Gravetender barely holds a buggy floating candle to Friede. If you went about the community and asked, what's your favourite part of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, I'm willing to bet the majority would say Sister Friede and Father Ariandel. And so that's what I did. The responses were, Sister Friede's Scythe, Sister Friede boss fight, this guy gave an essay, Friede, one bloke said the Crow Religion, Sister Friede is this guy's favourite boss of all time. And this fight continues the trend of From Software hiding their best fights within the DLC. For example, my Bloodborne boss rank, Lady Maria and Lawrence made it into the top 8, with Orphan and Ludwig making the top 2 spots. Throughout your experience through the painted world of Ariandel, you'll come across a bridge, and outside stands a man with the world's sexiest voice.
The words of Lady Friede will guide you.
I think I want to sleep on a bed made of your voice.
Inside the chapel he guards is Sister Friede, who warns you that there is no place for unkindled in the painting world, so we should come back from whence we came. Ignoring her constant warnings and opening the boss room, we're greeted to a Gehrman situation wherein the NPC who has been helping us throughout this journey is the eventual boss, and the fight is of increasing quality and difficulty as it goes on. First phase teaches you the basic moveset, a brief set of scythe swings and her ability to turn invisible, which, if you know the movement pattern for, is easily punishable. Quick tip, if she disappears and the snow goes up, then she's behind you. If she disappears and the snow goes left or right, she's gone in the opposite direction. Take notes, kids, because if she hits you with that grab, then get ready to die. First phase is relatively trivial. Backstabs are plenty, low health pool, and she's quite frail, so any sort of damage to her is traditionally going to result in a stagger, letting you get heavy combos off. That being said, if you have any hope of beating her, then don't take the practice for granted, because believe me, you're going to need it. Second phase brings up the intensity, if only slightly. Father Ariandel sees Friede dead on the floor and goes sicko mode. Oh, hey, it's the meme! Breaking free of his chains and in the process destroying the wooden foundations, revealing the entire scope of the chapel they're in. Sister Friede does get revived for this, but this phase isn't too dissimilar to the first, bar the theme going from a somber piano music to this.
Okay, it's happening! Everybody stay calm! I want to proceed! Stay calm!
Despite the increased theme intensity, all that's introduced is a sort of babysitting mechanic, but in a good way. Father Ariandel spends a duration trying to squash you with a bowl, while Friede sits back and only throws ice AoEs at you, unless you get too close and then she'll hit you for real. The most reliable way to win here is just to draw Ariandel away from Friede and go for damage on him, but pay real close attention to Friede, because if she goes invisible, she isn't going for damage this time. She'll instead get out of harm's way and start the healing, which is where the babysitting comes in. They do share a health bar though, and since you're never really dealing with both of them at the same time, you should be relatively golden. Once you down one of them, they both fall, and you're given a Titanite slab for your victory. Huh? Sister Friede gets revived for a second time and is renamed to Black Flame Friede, now dual-wielding scythes and becoming infinitely more aggressive. If Phase 1 was to teach you the basics, Phase 2 was for babysitting, Phase 3 just straight up fucks you in the arse. Her attacking combos are more fluid and pack a much larger punch, and the speed she attacks with means that any one of her attacks can seamlessly follow into another. One time you may get away with a combo of scythe attacks and get some well-deserved damage in, next you'll get hit with the same combo followed by a Black Flame Slam and just get decimated. Her invisible attack now combos into 2 or 3 at the same time, not to mention you're as good as back to the bonfire if she hits you with her grab attack, probably the coolest looking grab attack in the entire game. Although she's still Friede, her health pool's boosted a little, but she's still susceptible to backstabs, and if you catch her at the right moment, she'll stagger to where you can get a full combo off. In a nutshell, beating this boss was a brilliant feeling. With the exception of the Nameless King, Friede was the first boss since Pontiff to take me into double digits, and much like everyone mentioned prior, she's my favourite part of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, and is in my opinion well deserving of starting off the top 5. Only just missing out on a podium, we have the big bad dragon of the game, Midir. Midir has probably one of the best lead-ups to a boss in the entirety of FromSoft's history. Lady Maria has mentioned in an amazing cutscene to start, a man on a horse shouting,
My name is Gilbert
is also a good example, but none have a drop down to one of the best arenas in the game and probably the best start to a theme ever.
You ever seen anyone basketball? Them bitches like that shit on me. They call me Proper up in this motherfucker.
You see Midir twice on your adventure through the Ring City before you get to fight him. Once on the walkway just before the Spear's boss room, but even before that, as you walk up to the Phantom Arrow's Gauntlet, you can see him chilling on the cliff's edge, which I'm willing to bet the vast majority of you didn't know about. Being the optional boss of the DLC, you have to go out of your way to find him, as once you manage to knock him off the bridge, which is a tall task in and of itself, you continue onto a statue of Gwyn, where jumping out of an elevator early and clearing an illusionary wall leads you to a pit where Midir lies at the bottom of. This fight also strays away from the quadrupedal beast fights. The likes of Vordt and Oceiros require you to stay underneath or behind them and hit their legs, but not with Midir. Midir will swipe at you constantly and then lay his head low. He'll breathe fire and drop his head to recharge. He'll shoot an absolutely massive damage dealing beam with follow-up explosions before having a very quick nap, and those that have seen my amygdala ranking know where I'm going with this.
Did I mention his head is the weak point?
Yes, instead of the Oceiros and Vordt strats, Midir takes minimal damage anywhere other than his head, meaning that for the most part you have to take all of his attacks head on, and all of them have a tendency to two-shot you. So it's understandable why Midir is widely regarded to be one of the, if not the toughest boss in the whole game. This fight was a very similar style of fight to Ludwig for me. It took me 37 runs to beat, the second most of the playthrough, but that was to a point where I could almost flawless the first phase with the exception of getting caught out by a fire attack or two. But Midir is the toughest boss out there, but it isn't a bullshit boss. He's very fair to fight. If he does the beam attack or slams you into the ground, even if he does the large sweeping attack that takes him all the way across the arena, his head will be there waiting for you to punish. Despite the high damage he deals, he will always reward consistent players with high damage of their own, which makes him tough, but very fair. Second phase makes the fight harder, initiated by expelling orbs of dark. Some of his attacks now get them as a follow-up, for example the hand slam. Where there was once a single slam in a damage phase, there's now a hand slam followed by tracking dark orbs being expelled to hit you. Where there was once a single beam strike, there's now an absolute barrage that you'll be lucky to come out of unscathed. It makes the fight tougher, yes, but Midir sticks to his word and makes the fight just as fair. If you adapt well enough to the new circumstances of the fight, he will eventually get stunned, and this visceral, no matter how low or high your critical damage is, will always do fixed damage. If you're playing with a +5 Hollowslayer Greatsword, +10 Sellsword Twin Blades, or bare fists, no matter what you do, it will always do around 3k damage, and if you've gotten him to that point, then you've as good as won the fight. And the fight itself is an absolute pleasure to go through, and I enjoyed it a lot. Bringing Midir down, in all honesty, made me feel probably the happiest I'd felt in a while, especially after having fought Halflight prior, because not only had I brought down one of the hardest bosses within Dark Souls 3, but what is probably the hardest dragon-type boss in all of Soulsborne, although I suppose we'll just have to see. Taking the bronze medal, we have the last boss of not only Dark Souls 3, but the entire Dark Souls trilogy. The Soul of Cinder is a massive redemption for final bosses in the Souls series. Gwyn got parried into oblivion, Nashandra and Aldia just plain sucked, and Rune Presence was nothing compared to Gehrman, so coming into this boss fight, one of the few I knew about prior, I knew I was coming into an absolute masterpiece. Along your journey, you find and talk to plenty of NPCs, all reawoken in the mission to link the flame, but the scale of this is truly apparent when you reach the boss arena. Ash covering the floor and swords aplenty jutting out from the ground, and when the avatar of the first flame appears, ripping the coiled sword from the bonfire he rested at and charging at you with full force. Many exalted lords have linked to the first flame, and it is their very souls that have manifested themselves as defender of the flame, and this manifestation mimics the builds of those players who have linked the first flame: straight sword strength builds, intelligence magic builds, thrusting spear miracle builds, and curved sword pyromancers, each build with its own movesets and abilities, meaning your adaptation to fighting him is paramount. It's such a cool concept to me that you're fighting what is essentially an amalgamation of every single Dark Souls run, whether that be single stat runs, bow runs, boss weapon only runs, randomizer runs, or using the IGN guide.
Well, what you do is you come up to this bridge and it will float down. Everybody around the office seemed to really like that one. It'll float down and we...
What do you mean everyone around the office loved that one? What's the joke?
All of them accumulate and form what is probably 1/1000th of what the Soul of Cinder is. Once you best the first phase of the Soul of Cinder, he starts to lose patience. All of the previous flame-linking lords he's summoned so far have not brought him success, and the hand he has been dealt has let him down. As the music crescendos into a symphony of drums, horns and vocals, the Soul of Cinder falls to his knees. It was apparent from the start that there was going to be a second phase of the fight, but nothing could have prepared me for the pure level of quality he was about to bring. And with nothing left for the Soul to do other than to hold his last stand, he reignites both himself and his fighting spirit, manifesting into none other than the original Lord of Cinder. The theme transitions seamlessly to mimic Gwyn's theme, and the Soul of Cinder then adopts his moveset, from the large sweeping combos to the grab, even to the sunlight attacks. I understand, as someone that may not have had much experience within the Dark Souls series, the level of nostalgia this brings, but having beaten Dark Souls 1 once myself, the feels of hearing the plin plin plon return to round out the entire series is just magical, and in my opinion, brings the perfect end to the series. Over the course of writing this script, I kept listening to the themes to see if they sway my opinion, and every single time I hear this part of the Souls theme, I just get really emotional. It is probably my favourite theme of the entire series. Having beaten Soul first try may not make it seem like the Soul is that hard, but considering the recommended level for most is around the 80 mark, I had gone through both DLCs prior, and I was quite over-leveled. He still took me all the way to the end, embered, no Estus, and a slither of health left. I honestly think that I just got lucky. Delivering the final blow to the Soul, he replicates Gwyn's death animation. Being granted the final Lord of Cinder title, you not only brought down the Soul of Cinder, but also Gwyn, the Abyss Watchers, Aldritch, Yhorm, Ludlith, and all the chosen undead to have linked the flame before. A perfect end to a brilliant series. In terms of Nameless King, I don't think I could describe the fight any better than I did in the actual video. Nameless King, very, very fun fight. King of the Storm. You can go and suck your dirty mother, you Muppet-looking, four-winged, sausage-roll-looking twat! And that is exactly the reason why I keep Nameless King at 2. And I had a lot of conversations with myself as to whether Nameless King deserves this placement. This was the hardest boss for me to place, entirely because the Nameless King is the hardest boss of base game, and I had the benefit of a 30-plus run session with him, so I understood his fight better. But at the same time, this great gangly knuckle twat, greasy-head bag can off to whatever arsehole he was squirted out from. Although the main selling point for me is the ratio the fight gives. For most experienced players, this will be 25-75. They'll burst through the King of the Storm thanks to the unnecessarily big bosses having a massive head weakness, and will spend a lot more time on the Nameless King. In terms of the King of the Storm, however, the camera is janky as f***. His fire AoE is absolute f***ing bollocks, and no one really likes him. Oh, were you waiting for however? No, not for him. He can join Halflight with him. For Nameless King, this fight alone was enough for my top spot, and his legacy as the hardest base game boss, definitely one that's cemented for me. In Democracy's fan vote of the difficulty for all 25 bosses, the community voted Nameless King as, granted, number 4, but the bosses that finish above him are Sister Friede, Gael and Midir, so he is the hardest of base game. His theme is an absolute classic, especially with the use of the harpsichord, and he absolutely shines on his unpredictability and his patterns, both in his ability to swipe at you with oddly geometric swings that hit you slightly earlier or later than you're expecting, using the wind surrounding him as a boost in speed, and his spear as a conduit for the lightning attacks. He almost seems like what Gwyn should have been, which is almost poetic, since instead of getting parried 4 times and going down like a stood up waffle, he uses the same sunlight/lightning power Gwyn had to kill the dragons, and lore-wise is heavily implied to be the firstborn of Gwyn through the dragon-slaying God of War references. But what fascinated me the most about the Nameless King is what his name actually might be. There are so many options to go off. Faram, the war god worshipped by the Feroz and Lion Knights. This name and Nameless King are the only mentions of a war god in Dark Souls. King of the Storm, it's unconfirmed as to whether the name of the Winged Drake was King of the Storm or whether that was the duo's title. Since we kill the Winged Drake in phase 1, the title's lost. Sen, the snake-esque creatures at the Archdragon Peak, could be some ancestor or descendant of the snake men from Sen's fortress, suggesting that he was its owner. Some vague theory suggests that since Ornstein's armour and spear can be found nearby with the absence of a body, that the Nameless King is actually Ornstein impersonating the true Nameless King. Also, the Super Ornstein cutscene somewhat resembles the Transition Phase cutscene, and would explain their similarity in fighting style, although it is debatable as to whether Ornstein impersonates out of respect, as if Nameless King is the firstborn, he may also be Ornstein's tutor, again explaining the similar fighting styles, or if Nameless King sided with the dragons and was exiled, Ornstein went to kill the Nameless King. The latter being more likely, since we find the Nameless King at Archdragon Peak, a place where people go to gain the power of dragons, and would explain the broken statues of the firstborn found in Dark Souls 1. Whatever his name is though, it's undeniable that this fight with the Nameless King is an absolute spectacle of what makes Dark Souls 3 brilliant. The constant switches in attack style, the unpredictability, but the altogether fairness of it, brought all together, means that the Nameless King only slightly misses out on number 1. The King of the Storm can still suck a dick though. I'll come at you and I'll break his f***ing legs, you little prick. Do what I'm saying. Do what I'm One of the groups that helped in the battles against dragons were called Slave Knights. Only the undead served as Slave Knights, warriors used as fodder in the bleakest of battles. The Slave Knights were used to fight, die, and fight again until madness ensued. Gael, one of these Slave Knights, eventually relieved himself of duty, abandoning his godly servitude and instead sought his own destiny, one he found through his niece, the painter girl in Ariandel. The girl can create a new world through the cleansing of the flame, however the pigments traditionally used mean that the worlds rot away easily, as is happening with Ariandel. A world painted with the Dark Souls pigment, however, would last. Gael's purpose was now to find the Dark Soul, so that she may paint a new world, but first needed to burn away the painted world of Ariandel with unkindled ash, one he finds when he transports you there.
And then the ashes were too.
Once we reach the Dread Keep, we follow Gael's journey, seeing the path his quest has taken him down and the notes that he leaves for us, but more importantly how long it has taken him. After seeing a pygmy lord, the keepers of the Dark Soul, crawling away in anguish, we find Gael eating another amongst the rotting corpses of the rest. He sees us as just another target to kill, and so the battle begins. Gael's fight is the best within Dark Souls 3 for me, and universally the most memorable for the community. 3 phases of non-stop action that consistently keep you on edge. His first phase keeps things simple with relatively readable combos that will test you, but in a sort of feral state. His second and third phase ups the ante, with Gael discovering he had the Dark Soul the whole time. He hollows and hits you with everything that he has left. Gael's mind has twisted. He never needed the Dark Soul for the painting, not even a normal soul. The pigment was all that was required. But Gael has long since forgotten the painting. He has long since forgotten the girl. His mind has corrupted, instead wanting more Dark Souls, wanting more power, coincidentally parodying the player. Throughout our journey, we've ventured to far and wide, through champions and dragons, through princes and kings, all to gain more power. Power is the only thing that matters. His sword swings get more choreographed with follow-up cape attacks. He explodes with a soul AoE to represent the man he's killed on his journey. He'll use both his repeater crossbow and destructo discs before he'll pull out the most artistic and animation I've ever seen in my life, paired with an increasing orchestra of music, one of my favourite themes in the game, making this fight all the more intense. Following up with an even more intense phase 3, where as well as an even more intense barrage of combat, you also have to look out for lightning striking the arena, meaning one wrong move and you're back to the bonfire. If your dodging or spatial awareness isn't good enough, f*** you arsehole, come back when it is. If your stats aren't good enough, well I guess it's back to the Dark Souls 3 equivalent of fisting pigs for you then, isn't it? If you aren't good enough, Gael will make you good enough. I realised that my beating him on run number 2 may mean my opinion isn't fully formed, and I switched up the order of this list multiple times over the course of writing it, but Gael still consistently made it top. I mean, it's literally just 2 badass dudes fighting at the end of the world to see who comes out on top on the grandest stage of them all, yet no one to witness. Again, one of the best parts of this boss is the lore. I know I may have made some bosses seem more like a lore entry than a boss rank, but to me it just brings so many things around full circle, to the point that after you beat Gael and go back to the painter girl, then you find Ariandel finally beginning to burn. It made me feel so much more invested in the bosses and therefore the world, like it's not just a game, which is why Gael's lore, on top of the action, music, environment, build-up, everything, all of it just cements Gael at the pinnacle of Dark Souls 3. Soul of Cinder may have been the last boss, but Gael is the undisputed final boss of Dark Souls as a series, and he quite rightly sits at my number 1 spot of Dark Souls 3 bosses. But once Gael falls, only we remain. The most powerful being in this world, no others remain to challenge Kira the Onion Knight's wrath. But what good is power if we're the only one? What good is power if there's no one to compare it to? At the end of the world, all we can do is look back upon what once was and reminisce on what has been. Thank you all for watching this boss ranking, as well as all the videos I've poured a lot of my time and heart into. If we're staying in character, then we've reached the end of Lothric. However, all that means is that from the ashes of this world, there arises a new world to conquer. But until then, thank you again for watching. I will link all the videos in the playlist below, and I will see you in the next series. Bye-bye.